Well, it's a pleasure talking with you all, and thank you so much for dialing in today. We have five really exciting companies that are blazing trails with regards to dual use innovation. I'm really excited about this. This is a conversation, so if you do in fact have questions, please go ahead and fill those out in the chat room, and we'll go ahead and we'll get to them during the course of the conversation. But I really wanted to, before we go any further, I wanted to sort of set the context and the tone about how dual use investing or dual use activities can be really exciting for not only the companies, but also for folks in the commercial market space and more importantly, folks in the public sector. When I was at DIU for a couple of years, one of the things that we noticed is that there were really five core constituency groups that needed to be satisfied in order to actually achieve maximum benefit for dual use startup activity within the department. First, and definitely not least, where you needed to have the priority problems come in from the uniform services. Because without those uniform services driving the conversation with their priority problems, you really didn't necessarily have an end user that was actually going to go ahead and take the innovation that came out of the funnel. Second, you needed to go ahead and have the folks on Capitol Hill, and those of you who have dealt with venture capitalists know the concept of limited partners. Well, I look at the folks on Capitol Hill, the authorizers and the appropriators, as being the limited partners in this equation. As long as you keep them apprised of what you're doing, you have no bounds as to what you can possibly do. And we'll get into a little bit of that later with some of the companies and some of the great things that they're doing that have registered with the folks on Capitol Hill. Third, you have the private equity and the venture capitalists out there that are the folks that actually give the rocket fuel that's necessary for a lot of these dual use startups to move forward. And I hope that some of the folks here in this conversation will share some of their interactions that they're having with their private equity / venture capitalists, because that'll be really, really awesome. Oftentimes, the private equity and the venture capitalists don't see the value in working with the federal government. But if you do have a successful dual use engagement, guess what? They will go ahead and go out of their way to actually help you find new opportunities within the Department of Defense, because they feel that that's going to be a great way of enhancing valuations. The next, which is the reason why we're here, are the portfolio companies and the entrepreneurs themselves that are at the tip of the spear of doing these really cool, innovative things out there. And without them, the government is floundering, because systems integrators have a place in this, yet at the same time, the systems integrators themselves are also looking for innovative concepts and startups with whom to work, which gets into the last piece of the equation, the systems integrators. One of the themes that you're going to hear and some of the questions that I'll ask and some of the things that I try to tease out in this conversation is the willingness of each one of these five founders and C-suite members of working with systems integrators. There are a couple of examples that we'll go ahead and get into, and I would really like for them to tease out why they're working with systems integrators, which can be huge force multipliers, especially with dealing with the folks that generate the priority problems and the folks on Capitol Hill. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first CEO, our C-suite member, and that's Evan Loomis of Icon, one of the StratFi recipients of the Super Sibber, as some of us like to call it. Evan, if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about the great work that Icon is doing. Hold on, I think we have a delay with regards to Evan, so we'll roll over to Jeff over at Apptronic. Jeff, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about what you're all doing over at Apptronic, greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, sure. So first, let me introduce myself. I'm Jeff Cardenas. I'm one of the co-founders of Apptronic. I'm actually vice president of strategy. Dr. Nick Payne is our CEO. So about myself, I'm a UT grad, undergrad and grad school. I had a couple of startups prior to Apptronic, and decided to go back to school and get my master's degree to really learn how to do it right. And some of you guys might be familiar with the Masters of Science in Technology Commercialization Program, or MSTC, at UT Austin. So I graduated from there and actually worked at the Innovation School at the IC² Institute. And there I met a professor, Dr. Luis Sintis, and his grad student, Dr. Nick Payne, as they were looking to spin out some technology from NASA, from the DARPA Robotics Challenge, to start a company. And basically fell in love with robotics then, and That was in 2016, and we've sort of been off to the races since then. And doing robotics, it's very expensive and takes a long time to build robotics, to build robots. And so for the last 4 years, what we've been doing is really building a core platform that allows us to build any type of what I call next generation robots, which are really mobile robots that are designed to work with and around humans. And so we've gotten to do a lot of really exciting things since we started in 2016. We've got 25 employees now. We started off, our first contract was actually with NASA, building the next generation of sort of motors and components that make up advanced robotic systems. And from there, we got into Iron Man suits, and from there, that led us into mobile robotic arms. And so we've got a lot of exciting stuff underway, but a big focus for the company today is around what I call mobile manipulation. So mobile robotic arms that can move a number of different things. And I think we'll talk about that here in a little while. We're working with Army Futures Command and Army Applications Lab, and really excited about the project that we're just kicking off now.
Perfect, Jeff, and thank you so much. And there are going to be a lot of questions directed your way with regards to being a hardware-intensive business and how that resonates with some of the venture capitalists out there who typically shy away from it. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
So, and then next we have Third Insight with Gareth Block. Gareth, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about you and what you all are doing over there at Third Insight, greatly appreciate it.
Sure, Sean. Good morning. Third Insight is a 4-year-old 10-person company out of Austin, Texas. We focus on autonomous navigation software, which is hardware agnostic. So over the last 4 years, my team has built out what's called visual scene understanding. So using computer vision, position estimation, and autonomous navigation software in an integrated way to solve problems that most AI cannot. And in this way, what we're really trying to do, for example, is play hide and seek with the enemy, or fly through cluttered environments and try to really make sense of what's going on, to do hard target tracking, hard target identification, find survivors. And so as part of that work, we've actually been working with Homeland Security for the last 3 years with first responders. And we're currently on 3 phase 2 Air Force SIBRs, all around autonomous navigation and autonomous multimodal sensor fusion for UAVs.
Got it. That's great work. And it's nice that you're working with the folks over at Homeland Security, because they can give you some degrees of freedom that you don't get when you're working in the Department of Defense. So we'll delve a little bit more into that later, get some firsthand experience and knowledge from you. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
Next, we have Joe Sullivan with Aerial Applications, which was also a StratFi recipient. So Joe, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your background, being the recipient, what all that entails, and if you want to get into the process now, you can. If not, we can go ahead and table that for a little bit later in the conversation.
Yeah, sure. So first off, I just want to say thank you for moderating this, Sean. I'm very excited to be here, and this is a fantastic opportunity. So thank you to everyone here. Aerial Applications is a software company specializing in geospatial intelligence and computer vision. And we've been around since 2015. We've taken on some private capital, about 4.5 million in a seed round. And we use that to actually gain traction on the private side. And so what we did is we came up through telecommunications, and we built a rapid prototype around being able to do disaster response mapping. So we started by really our big moment that kicked us off was Hurricane Matthew, where we mapped the entire city of Savannah, about 120 square miles with drones. And then we had, on-site data processing, and we gave them a map, and then we gave them a list of the locations where all of the power lines are down. And that, translated into further traction in the commercial side. And that story of, flying a drone, capturing all of this aerial imagery, building it into a 3D model, and then running that through computer vision to be able to identify objects. That really, really resonated and got us our initial traction with the Air Force. which was in large part, I think, thanks to the Capital Factory and the work that you guys have been doing there, we kind of got that first phase 2. Based on the research and development that we did there, we were able to deploy a proof of concept at Camp Bullis, and that translated into a pretty viable solution that has been adopted through the Strat5 program. So it's been a great ride. It's really exciting, and happy to kind of drill down on that as we need to. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, being a native Savannian, I really do appreciate anything that you do in the Chatham County area, in the Low Country. So thank you very much. And I also represent another Strat5 entity, and we've gotten some lessons learned that I'll go ahead and I'll bring into this conversation as well. But yeah, thank you for all the great work that you all are doing. And I'm glad that you brought up the Capital Factory, because one of the things that I wanted to showcase and highlight is the great work the Capital Factory is in fact doing. Those of you who have experience in working with the federal government, it is a rather interesting animal in the sense that everybody has their own specific domain and fiefdom, and everybody feels that they have the superpowers to do everything. Well, in reality, no one government entity or organization has that ability to pull off everything. So there needs to be a cooperate and graduate approach. Capital Factory, interestingly enough, is the only place where I've ever seen the folks of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, Department of Defense, FBI, and a few other federal agencies actually play well together. So kudos to Josh and the rest of the team there. Thank you so much for the great work. And I'd like to go ahead and get into the conversation as far as what are some of the lessons learned that you all have gleaned from your engagements with the government? And it can be in your current capacities or in previous capacities. I know, Jeff, you talked a little bit about the DARPA elements of the origins of the company. I'd love to sort of, hear from your perspective what that has been like to take it from sort of an ideation all the way to where you are right now today.
Yeah, I don't think a company like Abtronic could exist without help from the government. So you just look at high risk capital and the time horizon for the stuff that we're building, and really there's no one else that's willing to take the risk and make the type of investment that's needed to build this kind of stuff. So we sort of knew that from day one, and we got a phase 1 SBIR with NASA was really how we got started. And really what our strategy was work with the government, find opportunities where we could apply this technology early on and sort of build out this generic or generalized robotics platform that allowed us to really build any kind of robot in the future. And so that's what we did. We started off with NASA, and then we worked with another DoD entity. Like I mentioned, we went from humanoids to exoskeletons, and what they really wanted there was an Iron Man suit. So that was a pretty exciting and fun project to work on. Not something that a lot of VCs would have funded from start to finish. And so really, that's a unique opportunity presented by working with the government and the DoD. And then from there, we made a big discovery in robotic arms, really a new type of arm or a new type of motor that was very lightweight and powerful for its size and weight, and had a great application in robotic manipulators. And from there, we found a huge opportunity with Army Applications Lab and long-range precision fires for an application for that type of technology. And so all along the way, we've worked with commercial customers and mostly R&D labs, the kind of robotics that we do. It's not, super prevalent yet. But, like I said, we wouldn't have been able to build out this kind of technology without the help. And so now where we're at today is now we've matured this technology. We've spent the last 4 years building it. And now we are on a time horizon where we can go after venture capital, and we have a product that we can actually apply within 1 to 2 years. And so that's kind of an exciting step that we're at today, but, couldn't have done it without this. So for other founders out there, it's difficult at first to learn how to navigate the space, but once you learn and have someone to show you, and especially with everything that they're building here at Capital Factory, there's a lot more tools that are available now to help teach you. But I do feel like it's instrumental in building your business, and something that I recommend anybody really in deep tech to take a look at when they're starting out their company.
Perfect, Jeff. And so just to double click on one thing that you said you started off with NASA, and then I imagine went over to SOCOM, and then have now gone to a broader DoD swath. you say you've been helped. How much of that activity has been your own and the company's sweat equity, and how much of that has been the government actively sort of propelling you to have additional conversations with other components of government?
I think both. You know, it's a two-way street. So when we went from NASA to SOCOM, they found us. So they knew what we were doing with advanced robotic actuation and had seen the stuff that we had done for the DARPA Robotics Challenge. So they kind of knew what they were looking for. And they came to us, which was really a huge opportunity for us at the time. I think we were 6 guys, and you know, it was a big opportunity for us to have a chance to build that. And then a lot of it's been sweat equity with us pounding the pavement. So we started selling commercial product at the same time from day one. We knew we wanted to be a dual use company. And so most of that ended up sort of, you know, we started to sell to different robotics labs and different R&D groups at companies around the country and even across the globe. So it's kind of a two-way street. But what we found, especially in the SBIR program or SBIR program, depending on how you want to say it, is there's a strong interest from the government to see you commercialize this stuff and be successful in the commercial market. So that was always a big part of how we had to write these things up, and what we would talk to the customer about is, what are you guys doing on the commercial side? And really the commercial side was up to us. And so I think we've, you know, done a good job of sort of navigating both of those and put ourselves in a pretty good position as we look towards the future.
Awesome, and the future does look bright for you. So thank you for sharing that. And Gareth, could you please share, you know, some of your lessons learned in the engagements that you've done, especially also the Homeland Security piece?
Yeah, so we were actually in a very similar position to Apptronics. We had a very early win with Homeland Security, had selected us and really championed us for the first couple of years. They were essentially our only lifeline. And you really needed, and this, I think, again, to Jeff's point, you really need someone to stand out and essentially put a bet on the table that your technology has relevance and it has a commercial application, even when it's just in the pre-build phase, when you're just showing pretty pictures and eye candy. And so the DHS S&T, who, as I said, had become has now been with us for a very long time, they took us around and they kept the light while we figured out really what was the product market fit for the technology we were building. And again, just similar to Apptronics, I don't think that we could have built this on the back of a commercial sales strategy. We really needed, because we're trying to build like a DARPA hard problem, we're trying to build a general intelligence engine that can work on edge devices. That's not something that I could throw over the wall and just hope that it stuck. So we've been very fortunate, and I think, as you're all saying here, it's really apt. Capital Factory and the kind of center of gravity that all of these Department of Defense players have brought to the table. There's so much of a critical mass now. I mean, I even moved the company from Houston to Austin when we were early members of the accelerator program at Capital Factory. So that pivot was actually to bring people out here and build the company here, was almost entirely because the DoD space is now blossoming here. I mean, it would not be too much of a stretch to say, if it weren't for this recent explosion over the last couple of years, we would not be a company nearly the size. I mean, we've now, we're doing well. And so I would say, without that boon and the DoD's gamble on us, it would be a hard play. And then honestly, you know, we are dual use. The technology we're trying to build would be used for surveillance, drones, for potentially intelligent agents working alongside people. But actually, I think the risk averse and the difficulty of identifying what customers need in that marketplace is much more difficult than identifying what SOCOM or what the base of the future looks like and what those needs are. And I think the DoD is willing to take risks and put long-term bets on the table for technology that really could be revolutionary. That's maybe not DARPA hard, but actually has a pathway to success. And again, so it's been great.
So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about the DHS S&T process, because I'm familiar with it, but I would like for you to share it with a couple of other people as well.
Sure. So their customer, I mean, DHS, as you know, has probably got 20 plus agencies, including Border Patrol. There's a lot of maritime. There's obviously the TSA. If you dive into each of those agencies, they each have their own specific pain points and customer needs. And so what we did was we worked with S&T, and they selected us out of like 300. There were 10 of us to essentially break apart different customer demands. So we worked very closely with first responders, firefighters, and police officers to imagine what would a wearable technology be like to track those officers as they go in subterranean environments or in the middle of a house that's burning. What would it be like to identify victims only if parts of their bodies are occluded? Can you take into account that that children might want to crawl under beds, and therefore that a drone shouldn't just fly around and build a LiDAR map of the room, that it should really go down and deep down and dive and look for a child? There's all this kind of spatial reasoning and more higher level reasoning that humans take for granted that first responders deem as a prerequisite for implementation. And without that, they wouldn't even trust the device to act on their behalf. So that was a really big lessons learned, which is that trust is really the first step, and full autonomy is, I would say, 10 years away until we do human machine teaming and get to the point where people trust the intelligence that they're going to put their lives on and trust their kids' lives on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that it's really key, because I think what you tease out is that there are a lot of things that technologies can do today. Yeah, there needs to be a policy, and there also needs to be a broad general public acceptance of that. I mean, that's the case behind Google Glass. I think people will eventually get used to being able to wear something over their eyes that brings up a LinkedIn profile, or in the case of being a warfighter, that actually brings out threat information on the battlefield. Yet you really need to address all of the policy issues and also get people comfortable that this is something that's value additive versus something that actually is an invasion of privacy, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
Perfect. And Joe, I'd love to hear your thoughts, because I imagine that in the work that you were doing out in the Low Country, you had a little bit of a DHS, flavor to all of that. Coast Guard probably as well.
So yeah, it's funny. So so we came up entirely on the commercial side, which is crazy, right? And I would not recommend that as a path. But they were willing to pay for it, and so we scrambled, and our money came from private companies saying we need this information, and it was weird to kind of start there and then flip over to the defense side, because I'll say the defense side and just the government generally has a real appetite for early stage, for the people who know the acronyms, TRL, early stage TRLs, right? Technology readiness levels that are still not quite baked, and they accept that and can kind of work with that in a way that the commercial sector doesn't. So that's my takeaway is that it's really worth it to work with the federal government where you can to get that advantage on much more experimental R&D. If you can kind of get, like we've done, we've gotten this kind of agile loop going where ideally we're getting paid to do R&D from the federal government, and then we're getting just that component built and iterated and then pushed out to the commercial sector. We get testing and feedback, and then it comes back, and we get testing and feedback, and then we deploy it for our government client, and we just keep looping like that. And to tie it back to the StratFi, that was really a key component of how we wrote our proposals, was saying, okay, we've gotten this feedback from the commercial sector. That's super valuable. Let's see if there's an appetite on the government side. And as we think about the next 4 years of R&D that we're doing, that's exactly our plan. So we're getting operational budget over here. Then we're taking that and everything that we learn on the operational side, we're deploying that for R&D, making sure we really have a crisp understanding of the problem set, build the tech, get it operational. And we kind of keep stepping like that over the next 4 years.
Got it. So you're letting the government basically take care of the non-recurring engineering that you can exploit for commercial purposes, right?
That's the plan if everything works perfectly, yeah. And then we also, are leaning on venture capitalists to be there as well, right? So if we do it perfectly, the government underwrites all of our R&D. It's magic. But it also helps to have a bit of a safety net there too.
Got it. And where are you using that as a springboard into the VC conversation? Have you started that, or you talk about the commercial focus? How much of that is tied to, say, insurance companies or actuaries that you've been working with? Because I really want to address this point right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fantastic question. I think the way to think of it is, so we've been targeting venture capitalists that can understand the government space. And I think that is going to be absolutely critical for us as we scale, right? So we, the 80-20 on this market is that most of the revenue in the foreseeable future is government, and we need someone who understands that and isn't scared off by the fact that we only have 1 or 2 or, even at scale, 20 accounts, because those accounts have several million dollars behind them, right? It's a very different market paradigm than, like a B2C play where you have millions of customers that are hundreds of dollars each. So the first thing is just finding a partner that can kind of understand that and see that math. And then also understanding that working with the government is non-linear. This took me a long time to figure out, right? So it's not, hey, my annually recurring revenue is increasing 10% month over month. It's, I did this phase 1, I do this phase 2, I do this phase 3, right? And it's a stair step. And in some ways, I mean, it's almost like a pharmaceutical investment in that way, where you have like clear phases, you work along, you hit your technology readiness level, and then you rocket ship rather than kind of this linear thing. I don't know if that answers your question, Sean, but that's kind of how we've been approaching the problem set.
Got it. Yeah, and you actually bring up something that's a big issue with regards to the success of the SBIR program to date, right? Is that once you've achieved a phase 1 or a phase 2, what's the transition path into the larger, DoD or public sector engagement vehicle? I mean, Jeff, I'd let you answer this. How are you looking to leverage your SBIR activity into more full-fledged, production contracts, for lack of a better term, that are scaled out across an enterprise?
So, I mean, we've just finished up. We had a phase 2 and then a phase 2 option. And so actually the technology that was developed under that phase 2 is really what's leading into this Army Applications Lab project related to, mobile logistics, let's call it, and this robotic arm. And so we're looking for that to be a structure of a phase 3 SBIR, but a lot of that's still learning. I'll tell you in a few months how that ends up going. But it's a big opportunity for us. I mean, there's a number of different applications for this type of technology for mobile robotic arm all across the DoD. And so our goal is, like I said, to transition this into a phase 3 SBIR. But we're at the bottom of that mountain, sort of looking up. We're just getting started. So, frankly, we don't know yet. We'll see how that goes over the next few months.
Got it. And Gareth, what with regards to that same question, how are you all looking at this?
I think our primary target are in small business partnerships. One of the things I think a lot about is how do you take a $10 million, $20 million, $30 million company and make it into a $100 million to $1 billion company? And it's hard to imagine doing that on the back of these incremental contracts where you're fighting every year to put dollars to keep the lights on, to grow the company. That incremental build is very difficult. So instead, what I'm thinking a lot about now and what we put a lot of our energy into, are building relationships with other complementary small businesses, some of the folks that are in this Fed Supernova today, and understanding how we can each complement each other and we can bring to bear something that's bigger than the sum of its parts. And I think that even goes to the idea of building things like roll-ups, where you see Kratos, you see these Anduril Industries. There are these companies that actually are able to organically grow and get to the point where they are going to be Palantir-esque. Well, that's actually really, really difficult, and it takes a lot of backroom negotiations and plays to make that happen. So how do the smaller fish in this pond make that happen instead? And I always think of that nice advertisement where they had all the fish looking like a shark when they all swim together. And so I think the vision then is to bring together pieces that are really complementary, where people are willing to share in a common thesis that looks a hell of a lot like a Spark, that could be a Palantir, where you roll capital, where you raise DoD and private equity money, and you actually build an aggregated conglomerate that is as effective as a Kratos or an Anduril or a Palantir, but instead is really made up of much of our little pieces. Because I think we're all solving a very difficult problem, and individually it's a very steep climb. But I think if we were to bring those pieces together, we could really bring an integrated solution, which is a hell of a lot of value. And that's the goal.
Yeah, I would really agree with that, Gareth. I mean, I think the key to, or like one of the keys to the government is just being able to show that you can play well with others, right? Because even at the level of like a Lockheed Martin, they still have to system integrate and partner, and they're not solving it all themselves, right? And so, yeah, I see that as being absolutely mission critical for us as a business. Being able to partner with other players and put these solutions together, and to say, maybe there's an orchestration strategy. It's not a classic go it alone thing. It's everybody coming together into one place. Yeah, totally agree.
You all are a phenomenal pattern, and thank you so much, because you're teeing up the next phase of our conversation, that willingness to partner with systems integrators. And so just a little bit, Gareth, thank you so much for bringing up Kratos, because Kratos is one of the companies that really benefited from dealing with DIU. In fact, a lot of the plus-ups that they've gotten in the budget over the last 3-4 years have been because of the Valkyrie and the Mako programs that they've done with us over at DIU. And Joe, with regards to working with the Lockheed Martin, one of the things that was really intriguing is that if any of you know a gentleman by the name of Ken Merchant, he's now the supply chain lead for F-35 over at Lockheed Martin. When he was the vice president running F-22, he was incensed by the fact that all of the startups were getting all of the attention. So Merch brought his team out to the Valley a few years ago, and he says, I'm going to show you all that systems integrators can move at the speed of business. And he came out and he met with a host of companies out here, Jabil, Flextronic, and they ended up meeting up with this really cool company called Tempo Automation in the southern part of San Francisco. They ended up having a great relationship, and Lockheed Martin, went out of their own way to bring Tempo Automation on as a trusted supplier. And Tempo is doing printed circuit boards in 9 days, what it would have taken 9 months to do in the old process. And in turn, Lockheed Martin is realizing greater reward in their award fee moving forward. So Joe, getting back to the Lockheed Martin and that cooperate and graduate piece, how open are you, and this goes to the rest of the panel, of working with some systems integrators and leveraging their facility clearances, leveraging their contract vehicles to do exactly that cooperate and graduate?
That's an awesome story, Sean. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I would say we're not only open to it, we are aggressively seeking these partnerships, right? And I think that the key here is we're all trying to listen to our customer, right? So we want to, we've had the privilege of being able to meet with our clients at the Air Force, and to really hear what their problem sets are. I never want to lose that. I want to make sure that we're always there. But if we're doing our job of listening, we're going to hear, okay, I need to work with this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy. And I think there could be some really, beautiful magic where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And we can actually execute on things that we wouldn't be able to otherwise. If it's just, if I have to grow to the size where I can support, like you said, a security cleared facility, that's going to take me, if I start today, 12, 18, 24 months, right? Buying the real estate is going to be 10 months, right? So being able to kind of leapfrog some of those steps would be a huge benefit for us. So yeah, I would say it's absolutely essential. And it's challenging because each of those is a sales cycle in itself, right? Where you have to get the attention of the behemoth. But I what I've seen is that some of them are trying to make it easy for you. And so we're trying to kind of crack into that where we can.
Got it. Thank you. Gentlemen, Jeff, did you want to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, so we don't have any experience working with any of the, the big defense contractors on at least the defense side, but actually our first commercial sale was to Lockheed Martin in their commercial division. So they were building a commercial exoskeleton for workers. And so that was one of our first projects that we worked with them on. And that was great. And so as we started to get into defense exoskeletons, we've maintained a great relationship with them. And I would say there's certainly some stuff on the horizon and opportunities to work with them. In terms of collaborating, I think there's potentially a question for later, but that's really what Army Applications Lab is all about. And that's what they're doing in the cohort program. So the idea is a system of systems. And so there's 6 different companies that set out to solve this big problem for long-range precision fires. So they call it FAR, Field Autonomous Artillery Resupply. And basically, it's a huge problem. How do you automate the logistics chain out in the field to get artillery out, to the cannon itself? And so we're one of 6 teams that were selected for that. So we're the robotic manipulation team. But there's a AI vision company, there's a mapping company, there is a autonomous vehicle company, and everyone sort of makes up a different piece of the puzzle for this. And so they call it the systems of systems approach. And in our group, there's one group that's sort of basically spun out of Carnegie Mellon called Carnegie Robotics, and they're sort of us 4 years into the future potentially. And so they're sort of serving as potentially the systems integrator in this group. They're about 150 employees or so, whereas we're 25. So I do think it's all about teamwork. There's no way we could solve a problem like this. We're looking at a 3-year time scale to solve this problem, and there's no way we could do it without working with everyone. So I can dive into that deeper, but that's been a really exciting project from the onset.
Well, I wish you would dive into 2 elements of what you just wonderfully articulated. First off, how is the government planning to integrate those 6, components together? Because government typically doesn't do a great job of integrating systems. And then B, you bring up the folks that are Carnegie Mellon out of the Pittsburgh area. How are you bringing that innovation ecosystem together with the Central Texas innovation ecosystem? Because sometimes a lot of things get lost in translation in both senses.
Yeah, so Carnegie Robotics really specializes in sensors. So I talked about the DARPA Robotics Challenge. They built a mine-sweeping robot, and on that created a unique type of vision system. And actually, we used that on Valkyrie in the DARPA Robotics Challenge on the NASA team. And Boston Dynamics used that, and a number of other robotics teams use that. So they really specialize in advanced vision and have done and really kind of serve as a systems integrator at a maybe a smaller scale than the larger defense contractors, but they're looking to graduate up the next level. And I think from our end, we're excited to learn from them. So we've learned a lot. Their ecosystem for robotics is more mature than what it's been here in Austin. And so we've got an opportunity to see what they've been able to do. They're in a 65,000 square foot facility, I think building another 30,000 square foot facility. And so as we're building out our company, they've really been, sort of an inspiration, and we've learned a lot from their team, and they've been really open with us. So, it's been a great experience working with them so far. We're the first group to go in the cohort program. So we went from concept development into now we're actually building what we conceptualized. So there's still a lot to learn, and it's really the very beginning of it. But so far, so good. It's been a great experience. The Army Applications Lab and Acme and Alliant is the prime actually that we're working under, has been great. And so far everybody's been playing really well together. I think the key to making that process successful was the selection process and making sure that you had groups that each did something well and there wasn't a ton of overlap in the groups. So we're not really competitive with the other groups that we're working with. And we all kind of each have our own complementary skill set. And so far it's been awesome. And we'll let you know in 9 months when we get done with our first build cycle on this.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, because there's a lot of pressure on Army Futures Command to go ahead and generate a lot of success, since there's been so much cash that's been, allocated, authorized, and appropriated for them. So wishing you all the best. And Joe, did you want to bring up a point?
Well, so I actually, Jeff, I'm curious, how are you guys handling intellectual property in this partner ecosystem, right? Because I got to think that's a very delicate dance.
Yeah, so that was something that we talked about early on, and I would say that that's probably going to continue to evolve. I think from our standpoint, what we had so Alliant is the prime, and then basically all of the startups are subs under Alliant. And so what we did was we had an agreement, with Alliant, but then the startups that really wanted to collaborate, we created separate agreements with each other. And then basically we worked on co-developing concepts with each other. And what we did was really just sort of carve out our specific lanes. So for us, it was like, we want to be the robotic manipulation team. And that's what we do, and we do that well. And then in terms of being the systems integrator, Carnegie Robotics was very interested in taking that, because they'd had a system of record before, and just were a larger company that could take on the overhead to be able to do that into the future. And so, we're 4 months into this, and so far everyone's been playing well and playing nice, but there's still a lot to learn as we grow out the actual products and really take them to the next level. So far so good, but this is a learning process. So
yeah, Joe, that's an excellent question, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because one of the things so the role that I fulfilled at DIU when the organization still had the X was business development and engagement. And what that meant was that I was principally responsible for building relationships with the VCs, private equity on Capitol Hill, and then also the folks in the Pentagon. And we would frequently get 2, 3, and 4 stars and political appointees that would come out, and they would bring up oftentimes the intellectual property. And the one bit of advice that we gave was that DoD is the caretaker of the biggest graveyard of intellectual property that exists out there. And I would sort of harken back to the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, when they put the Ark of the Covenant in that big warehouse. That's basically what DoD does with intellectual property. So I encourage all of you to diplomatically push back and just say, hey, we would like to house the intellectual property, because guess what? If we're able to go ahead and keep iterating for a commercial customer, that's R&D that you don't have to pay for Department of Defense. So you should care less where that intellectual property resides. So good on you for asking the question. And Jeff, I actually wanted to go ahead and talk a little bit about the hardware piece of things that you're doing. We have a question that comes in from Frank Custis. Have you started the process of engaging with VCs for building out your enterprise?
Yeah. So we raised a pre-seed round, a small round, and actually we were targeting to raise a seed round at the beginning of this year, but ended up landing more revenue and contracts than what our target raise was. So sort of wanted to get our feet under us in terms of our growth. And now we're planning a raise for this fall. And so the conversations are going well, and I kind of have a unique vantage point in terms of VCs, because my wife is a VC. And so she works with a group called Ecliptic Capital, a new venture fund here in town that's really great. And basically, what we had talked about in building the company was really just about time horizon for VCs. So it's not that, and the VCs that we talk to, it's not that they're not interested in hardware. It's just that they're really on a 5-year, maybe 10-year. There's new ones like Mithril Capital here in town has a 15-year, but really that ends up being like a 7-year time horizon for going to market. So it really, they're not opposed to hardware, but they are opposed. They have a time scale that they've got to face. So for us, the way that we managed that was bootstrap ourselves or build the company off of revenue in the early days, mature the core technology until we get to a point to where we can meet that venture time scale. And so sort of now here we are. And I like to say we worked our way backwards. So we started off in humanoids. That's 5 to 10 years, then got into exoskeletons, and now here we are with a robotic arm. And in terms of VCs, that seems to be the sort of home run for us. So we can apply this technology in the next year. We do the full stack on the arm, so the intelligence, we call it vision-based grasping, so the manipulation side as well. And the feedback from VCs so far has been really exciting. They seem to be very excited in this current environment. I think coronavirus has changed a lot of the business models out there to where companies that are revenue positive or cash flow positive today are even more attractive than they've ever been. And so, gone are the days, I think, where you can say, wait for 5 years and I'll show you revenue down the road. And so that's been really positive for us. And so we'll see once again how that process goes in the fall. But right now it looks really good.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, Jeff, and thank you, Frank, for your question, is that you're going ahead and you're building out as much as you possibly can on the government dime, also with some revenue coming in, also with some VCs that are interested. Yet you're really looking to a time on the horizon where you actually have more of an integrated solution to where the government and also the commercial sector, specifically VCs, are willing to go ahead and cut bigger checks. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so Frank, to your question, building on what Jeff wonderfully articulated, it seems that when you talk about an integrated system, that's when it actually finds traction with a VC investor. If you're familiar with Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, Andreessen Horowitz has that saying, software will eat the world. I think at the end of the day, even the most hardware intensive company has a sizable software component to it. So I think if you can talk about future growth and actually what that looks like on the horizon, that's where you really garner the VC investment. So Gareth, I'd like to talk a little bit about what you all are doing specifically on the Halo aspects of what you're building out. And then also too, what other domains outside of DoD are you looking actually to exploit with the capabilities that you're building out? If you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about some of the partners that you're cooperating and graduating with.
Sure. So Halo itself is, as I mentioned, it's around this notion of visual scene understanding. So building a contextual awareness about either visual data feeds or multimodal sensor feeds, taking into account, for example, we did a project for DHS a couple of years ago where we had a knowledge graph that tracked the known relationships of two terrorists from their work and training in Libya to a potential bombing in Berlin, through the port of entry in JFK, and then ultimately to a set of CCTV cameras that were looking out onto Times Square. And the question was, how would you build a representational model that would say, hey, these are the kinds of relationships I know. These guys are brothers. This guy is wanted for a bombing in Berlin. And I see this person out in this crowd. Normally, facial recognition would just do one individual face at a time. But how would you juxtapose and say, you know what? Look, two brothers just came through this port. What are the likelihood that two brothers are going to be standing far away? Maybe I should look at groups of people together and try to do some kind of boosting. And so that technique really led us to the first patent, where it was, you can use these network effects. You can use expert systems to drive higher order qualitative reasoning, just like humans do, and using deep learning as the kind of grassroots parts. But you're now using a knowledge graph or a probabilistic semantic graph in the fancy words. So that is really Halo in a nutshell. We've ended up putting that on drones so that drones can look out into the world and try to recognize what's a potential threat and why are there certain things in the scene? How are they related to one another? A typical example might be, you and I, if you got drunk, you woke up one morning and you looked up and all of a sudden you saw this kind of like rugged steel piece, like 5 inches from your face. You'd be like, what the hell just happened? Well, you might try to orient yourself by looking down at one of your feet. And all of a sudden you look down at your feet and you see something that looks like a wheel. Well, you and I would both probably then immediately, I guess it's a truck or a car, probably not a car because it would have crushed you. So then you might look at the other foot and you might say, oh, well, shit, there's another wheel there. There must, either this thing is completely aphysical and it's about to fall over on me, or there's a third support or fourth support behind my head. That kind of iterative reasoning is what we've built onto our drones. So they do both abstract processing as well as physical planning in the world. And they try to figure out, for example, if I want to deliver a small bomb into the intake of an F-35, let's say, God forbid, the Chinese make these little drones and these drones fly out onto the tarmac and maybe let's not use our own aircraft. Let's use one of their aircraft. What would it be like to deploy a bunch of these small, 3-ounce plastic explosive chunks into the intakes of aircraft that are distributed among the tarmac? Well, those little aircraft would have to reason about what they're seeing. They would have to identify the parts of the aircraft, try to, navigate around based on what and they'd have to orient themselves. So it's really an OODA loop problem, if you're familiar with the term. And we've embedded that OODA loop into the software, the iterative structure of the software itself. So that's the how. Remind me, what was the second question?
No, the question is, who are the collaboration partners that you're doing that? Because, of what you just described, which sounds like a really awesome night of partying that sort of like didn't go well.
Exactly.
Who owns that data feed of the supply chain? Where do you factor in, and who are some of the other collaboration partners in that conversation?
People like JSOC and JCOG. So there's a massive kind of a security and intelligence apparatus that we're getting a lot of traction. So they're basically like kind of three methodologies that we're looking at. One is to deploy to retrofit new and legacy UAVs to be hardware agnostic, so we can take a Puma or a Raven or even a small, like the Fleur has a little Dragonfly, to make those things smart. Take dumb things and make them smart. The other thing is to build an edge and a fog and a cloud architecture for intelligence agencies that allows them to do this kind of sophisticated edge-based reasoning. Those edge devices, IoT devices, could be body cameras, could be drones flying around, flying down streets in Afghanistan. These are so the short answer is hardware vendors and primarily intelligence agencies is where we're working now.
Got it. So it sounds like you're working with entities like AeroVironment, possibly like a Shield AI, some of the bigs out there.
Yeah, and this is, I think, the nuance then is that the Skydios and the Shield AIs, they've raised enough capital where they could put us to shame. What is it like to have $100 million float into your checking account the next morning? That feels pretty good. And you might just then say, oh, you know what? I'm going to build my own autonomy team. I don't need some fancy AI technology, knowledge graphs. Well, actually, it's really, really hard to execute on any deep concept, right? And so you've got to position yourself, and this goes to the roll-up stuff again. Any individual company that raises enough capital either is going to screw it up, just burn cash with no great effect, or is going to do it right. And if they do it right, they're going to be the Kratos, they're going to go up and that knee. So in order to race them, to prevent them from getting a lock-in on that space and building out their own capabilities, people at our level really have got to work together to form a warring tribe to go after that piece of meat.
So on that piece of meat, let's assume that that's VC dollars. How are those two entities, Skydio and Shield AI, not wanting to put them on the spot since they're not on the call here, how are they opening doors for you with Andreessen Horowitz and some of the others? Or if you don't want to get into that, but is that a part of the strategy that you have of leveraging some of their relationships that they have to garner additional investment for you, since you are an enabler for them and their platforms?
Right. So what I would say is that we're more of an enabler for the AeroVironments, who probably look at the Shield AIs as incumbent, well, not as incumbents, as they're obviously AeroVironment's the incumbent. They're looking at those as intruders on their own turf, where they've traditionally owned the DoD sales in that market space. So I think what's really going to happen is that there are larger entities that are older school but still middle range, and they're going to look at us and they're going to say, gee, we're going to get our breakfast eaten for us by the Skydios, by the Shield AIs, if we don't buy up a third Insight to engender our aircraft with the kind of intelligence that these people are trying to organically grow. It's a hell of a lot easier AeroVironment's probably got $200 million in cash on their books right now. So it's a hell of a lot easier for them to just say, well, geez, man, yeah, you could try to raise $100 million in venture capital, or why don't we just buy this little company and, wrap them in and build out a technology which is first class.
Got it. Thank you so much. Because I think by all of the work that you're doing with some of these systems integrators, that's a built-in liquidity event for you if you decide to go ahead and take that path. And so in just the remaining couple of minutes that we have, and Jeff, you sort of teased this out as it relates to COVID. Joe, what has it been like over these last couple of months? And if you wouldn't mind just sharing in a few seconds, it's been like since the great lockdown of 2020 for you all there.
Yeah, sure. So, I would say we've been fortunate enough to be able to do most of our work remotely. So in that sense, business is still moving forward. I think what we're seeing though is that at the DoD, COVID safety implementation processes have had knock-on effects in our business. So what we thought would be, hey, this is a simple contract, we can get this done quickly, or like I've got a loop here that should be a relatively painless thing, is now getting thousands of paper cuts of, right, like, oh, that person is off this week, or that person shifted to a night shift and we're only at 50% capacity. And so there's in some ways there's been like increased demand, and there's been the sword cutting a good way, and then in some ways there's been this kind of, oh, I didn't expect friction to be here. Like I thought there'd be friction, but I didn't think it'd be, in this area. So that's been kind of an interesting take that we didn't expect.
Understand. Well, I appreciate that. And Jeff, I mean, you teed it up, but we are at the end of our time. So I would like to thank you all. It's been a phenomenal conversation and I really appreciate it. And just the one bits of advice that I have for you and others out there is to continue to keep doing the great work that you're doing. Continue to be open to the collaborative partnerships that you're already forging and will eventually forge. And getting back to those limited partners on Capitol Hill, make sure that they are apprised of all of the great work that you're doing, because they could be a huge force multiplier for you moving forward. So with that, thank you so much, everyone who's dialed into the conversation. And Julie, back over to you.